Will Zack Harrison, Haason Reddick, or Matt Judon solve the Falcons' pass rush woes?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the summer heats up, sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I appreciate each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast. That means you make it your first listen, your first watch each and every day. And if you want to join this illustrious club of everydayers, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we're talking all about the pass rush. We're just going to have to play wait and see when it comes to Justin Simmons, right? And so we'll just focus on the pass rush and we'll see what comes of the Justin Simmons stuff. You know, that may be a topic tomorrow. Hopefully it's a topic tomorrow. We can talk about that. But, you know, we'll talk a little bit about some potential trade options for the Falcons, some big names, some lesser known names on today's episode. But, you know, I've been asked the question, like, do the Falcons need to go outside their building in order to address their need for pass rush, especially at that edge rusher position? Because, you know, they have Zack Harrison. And what are the chances, Aaron, that we should move Zack Harrison back to, you know, the edge and whatnot? And I get where this comes from, right? Basically, what I'll say up front is I'm not as big a fan of making Zack Harrison an edge again. But I understand if it's based off of the idea that we just need to get our four best pass rushers on the field. And, you know, two of those are Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. And if Zack Harrison's one of those four, then, you know, that means he's probably going to play edge over while those two guys are in the middle. I get that, where that's coming from. I don't think that's wrong. Now, for me, I don't personally think if Harrison is at edge, he's one of your four best pass rushers. Since I tend to like him a little bit more as an interior rusher, I'll break that down more in a minute. And I think as an edge, as a pure edge, like, he's probably not adding a whole lot in that role that you aren't already getting at a Lorenzo Carter. With Lorenzo Carter, he's been very consistent and very reliable, getting a certain level of production throughout his, 4 years in New York and 2 years here in Atlanta, which is basically he'll get you 3 to 5 sacks, he'll get you 30 to 35 pressures. And I don't really think Zack Harrison as an edge rusher is going to do much more than that. Now, again, I think the counter is, you probably would say, well, even if they're the same level of production, I would much rather watch Zack Harrison do that than get that same production than I would Lorenzo Carter. And that's fair, right? That's fine. And I certainly think there is a timeline where we might revisit this topic, and I'd be much more open to the idea of the Falcons moving Zack Harrison to edge later, maybe during the season, as well as the possibility that maybe Caden Ellis could get more looks as an edge rusher. We've talked a little bit before earlier this summer about Caden Ellis and having a package, right? Maybe 5 to 10 snaps, as an edge rusher, but not necessarily as a full-time edge rusher. But, that timeline where we're talking about more serious about either Harrison or Ellis is one where maybe there are more injuries at outside linebacker. Maybe Lorenzo Carter and James Smith-Williams and Arnold Ebiketie don't quite produce to the level early in the season, and we're getting, in October, and we're saying, well, Zack Harrison and now Caden Ellis are our best options because our other options didn't necessarily pan out. So when I talk about Zack Harrison at edge, let me specify, I'm not really talking about him being a full-time, outside linebacker in the 3-4 where he's going to be asked to drop into coverage and do all that stuff. I'm thinking more just specifically nickel fronts, third downs, passing situations where he's going to put his hand in the dirt, probably as a 7-tech defensive end and get upfield. And I think he can certainly is more than capable of dabbling in that role, similar to kind of Caden Ellis. Handful of snaps a game, sure, that's great. But if he's going to be like your main guy in that role, I'm not as high on him. And a lot of that is because I like Zack Harrison. I don't like him as much as edge for two reasons, right? One is I like him more as an interior pass rusher than an outside pass rusher. I think his length, his quickness, his power creates more mismatch issues for guards than it does tackles. It's why I compared him to Charles Omenihu last year as his ceiling comp, and that's kind of that inside-outside role is what Omenihu has excelled at the last couple of years in Kansas City and San Francisco. It's why Calais Campbell was a great mentor for Zack Harrison, because Calais Campbell has done that, right? Where it's like early downs, you're playing outside, you're there to add size and physicality to set the edge against the run, and then on passing downs, you kick inside and you rush the quarterback. The classic Michael Bennett role. Now, we've learned over the last decade, that Michael Bennett's a one-of-one player, so I'm not suggesting that Zack Harrison is the next Michael Bennett, but it is one of those things where a lot of people are looking for that type of player. I think if you move Zack Harrison to edge, it goes to my second reason, which I think potentially stunts his growth as an interior pass rusher, because I think it's in the team's best long-term interest to keep Harrison more as that interior five technique defensive end, because Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata aren't getting any younger. And while we have spent a lot of time this summer talking about Ruka Rororo and Brandon Dorlus potentially as the heir apparents to Onyemata and Grady respectively, that's really a 2026 and beyond conversation. And then even then, like the odds that they reach that level again, not saying that the odds that they are be a bust or anything, but the odds that they're going to reach that sort of level in terms of reaching that type of ceiling where they're on par with where Grady Jarrett and Onyemata have been throughout their careers, it's like an 80% chance that they don't reach that level, right? That's just the general odds of players not necessarily reaching their ceiling in the NFL. And because that's a 2026 and beyond conversation for Rook and Dorlus, what happens if, Grady or David Onyemata, start to show signs of decline before 2026, right? Who's the player that's best positioned to pick up that slack if that is the case? I think Zack Harrison is that player. Now, maybe you could throw Taquan Graham into the mix, but I need to see Taquan Graham develop a pass rush move first before I put him above Zack Harrison in that regard. So, I'm sure plenty of you are like, I'm not that concerned about the long-term thing because I'm much more concerned about the short-term need that we have at edge. But again, like, I don't think there's a lot of upside to moving Zack Harrison to edge, even on the short term, right? Because like, what are the odds that he's good enough there that this is going to be a permanent move? Right? In the sense of like 6 months from now, are we going to be having a conversation like, oh, edge is no longer a pressing need for the Atlanta Falcons because of how great Zack Harrison played this year? Again, non-zero chance of that happening, but probably not a high probability. And in all likelihood, Zack Harrison isn't changing the math on that, right? Like, we're going to go into next offseason looking for a major upgrade at edge, hopefully Michael Parsons, we'll see how that develops, but it's more than likely that 6 months from now, we're going to be looking for an upgraded edge and kicking Zack Harrison back inside to a 5-tech in 2025. And in the meantime, you just lost an entire season, in my opinion, of critical potential development for him as that sort of 5 technique, in terms of his long-term development in that role. So I'm sure other people see it differently. I'm sure there will be opinions that vary on that one, but, I wouldn't be mad if the Falcons decided, like, let's try Zack Harrison because, as I often say, beggars can't be choosers. And it's always weird that I'm always having that same conversation and saying that same statement every time when it comes to the Falcons pass rush. And I've been saying that for like 7 years on this podcast, but it is what it is, right? I say it is what it is a lot of this podcast too. But, to me, like, and I think I talked about this on the podcast back in June. It was like, if the Falcons do have to move Zack Harrison back to edge, it's such an indictment on like their offseason strategy, where it's like, we're going to bulk him up to 290 and we're going to make him a 5-tech. And then we get to the season. It's like, well, that plan's completely out the strategy. We need Zach to go on a diet, run on the treadmill, put a couple of garbage bags, get down to 270 so that we can have you as an edge rusher. Like, again, it's to me, like it's moving him to edge is such I'm not going to say a disaster scenario because it could theoretically work out. It's just so much of a like, oh, this team is just bad at planning. But I'm not going to rant about that on today's episode. I'll save that rant for another day. But maybe the Falcons offseason, they're actually really good at offseason strategy because they're just like, we're just going to lie in wait until August and we're going to scoop up somebody on a discount. And could that potentially be Haason Reddick, right? So let's break down the possibility of the Falcons. We're talking about Justin Simmons. What's the possibility of the Falcons make another splash on defense and make a trade for Haason Reddick, and we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So it is the summertime, and sometimes with the Olympics over, the NFL preseason's picking up, but we're still several months away from the NBA and NHL season, and depending on what team you support, may determine how invested you are in the Major League Baseball season at this current point. And so sometimes during the summer, sports aren't sporting like we want them to, and FanDuel is going to hook up all customers to keep the party going with a daily booster bonus. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just head over to FanDuel.com to make the most out of your summer. And if you want to, get involved with this weekend's preseason action against the Ravens are 1.5 point favorites in the preseason on Saturday. And if you're not willing to go that extra mile for the preseason, maybe you're looking ahead to the regular season, that week 1 line between the Falcons and Steelers. The Falcons are favored by 2.5 points. So, is that going to change over the next 3.5 weeks between now and then? Probably. So don't wait. Head on over to FanDuel.com to make the most out of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So since it has worked, I guess 1.5 times, maybe twice, if the Falcons actually do reel in the big fish of Justin Simmons, I'll just come out and do it. There is absolutely no chance, none whatsoever, and anybody who thinks there's any possibility that the Falcons are going to trade for Haason Reddick is delusional. It's never going to happen. So, we'll see, like the Penix pick and potential Justin Simmons signing. We'll see if that mojo, that prophetic mojo works its powers. But in all seriousness, I don't think it's likely that the Falcons are going to land Haason Reddick. In all seriousness, it is probably not going to happen. But we'll hope, right? And basically this is my understanding of the whole Haason Reddick saga, I guess you could say, going back to the beginning. I'm sure Locked On Jets will have more insight into it, so go check them out. And of course, why not check out Locked On Fantasy Football too? Find out who is rising, who's falling on various draft boards after week 1 of the preseason. Locked On Fantasy Football is part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So with Reddick, basically it started back in February where he basically wanted a new contract, and the Eagles were like, you can talk to other teams and work out a trade. And Reddick was like, wait, no, I don't want to live Philly. I don't want to leave Philly. I just want a new deal. And then, Howie Roseman was like, so you want to leave Philly then? Basically saying, we're not going to give you a new deal. They wind up signing Bryce Huff. And, there was a point in like late February, early March, where there were some rumors floating around that the Falcons were interested in Reddick. I saw that attributed to a website, some Philly website, and I went to the website and couldn't find any sourcing from that. So I just think it was aggregators making up a thing and just attaching a random tweet to it and saying like, this is a source, So I don't know if that was 100% true, but it's at least worth mentioning. But eventually we saw Reddick at the beginning of April get traded to the Jets for a conditional pick in 2026. I think it was a 3rd rounder in 2026 that turns into a 2nd rounder. And from what I understand, the Jets did make an initial offer to Reddick on a new deal. He rejected that offer. And I think he sort of assumed we're going to keep negotiating, right? And the Jets were like, no, we're not. And so the current dilemma at this point in time is basically the Jets are like, we need you to report to camp and then we'll restart negotiations. And Reddick is like, restart negotiations and I'll report to camp. So they're kind of at an impasse. And so now Reddick is actually saying, yes, I do want to be traded now so I can get this new deal, unlike before. So the Jets have come out multiple times, and most recently since this, basically Reddick's agent told the Ian Rappaports and the Diane Rancinis of the world, basically, we want to trade. And they tweeted about it the other day, and the Jets are like, yeah, we're not going to trade you. We have no interest in trading him. And maybe they change their minds, but I think they're at a point where they kind of have to keep Haason Reddick to save face because they already gave up value for him, even if it's 2026 value via the draft pick. And they don't want to be in a situation where they want to basically give away a pick for nothing, right? It's kind of the sunk cost fallacy. And we know NFL teams always get caught up in the sunk cost fallacy. But, I think in order for a team like the Falcons to trade for Haason Reddick and get him out of New York, 2 things need to happen. First, you need to acquiesce to Reddick's contract demands. And second, you need to make the Jets an offer that they can't refuse, or, you can flip those in whatever order you want. But it's hard to imagine really any movement happening on either one of those fronts from the Falcons' perspective, right? That basically, unless the Jets are willing to grant the Falcons or any other team permission to negotiate with Reddick on a contract before the trade, which it doesn't seem like they're currently open to doing, then if you do wind up trading for him, basically sight unseen like the Jets did, that gives Reddick a lot of the leverage because basically you don't want to look stupid like the Jets are kind of looking stupid right now. You know, of course, Jets fans are like, no, Reddick is the idiot. And of course, everybody else like, why did you make this trade if you didn't work out a contract? You know, that whole thing. But you don't want to be that team now if you're the Falcons. So basically, Reddick has all the leverage in the negotiation because basically it's like, well, I want $23 million. And like, I guess we got to give it to you, know, or whatever the number is. And then on top of that, with the Jets trade offer, like you have to make it worth their while so that they can basically not feel like they gave up something, like they actually gained something. And so, you know, like, so if they give up a future third, you got to give them a future second or something like that. And it's like, oh, we actually got something in return from that so that they can sort of save face and come out looking smart and whatnot. And, you know, that's kind of my read on the whole situation. Now, again, I'm not an expert in it. That's just me based off of listening to other people that seem to be a little bit more knowledgeable of it. But, you know, the other issue, the hurdle that the Falcons would have to deal with on a Reddick trade was the cap space, right? $3 million in cap space currently. They would need at least $15 million to acquire Reddick. Now, you can get some of that cap space back after you sign him to an extension, but that's going to be one potential. That's probably the lesser of the hurdles, as we discussed yesterday. There are ways to free up cap space, but, you know, I'll just say this. If you know, despite the unrealistic possibility of it, the Falcons trading for Haason Reddick would be awesome, right? And I think we talked about the possibility of doing this back in March. And, you know, because we talked about the possibility of doing this back in March and the Falcons didn't do it back in March and they had every possibility to do it in March, I don't think it's likely that they're going to do it in August. But, you know, as we discussed yesterday, you know, things have changed, right? Seemingly, right? You know, I was born by the river in a little tent, you know, so hopefully things have changed, but I don't know if things really have changed for the Falcons, right? You know, but Reddick would be awesome coming off the edge, right? Like he's the perfect edge rusher for this team with the interior push that you're going to get from Grady and David Onyemata and the other D tackles. You want to have that fastball coming off the edge that's either going to force quarterbacks to step up in the pocket into that rush, or if that pocket collapses up the rush, the quarterback can't step up, and then Reddick is just going to clean up. And that's what made him so productive in Philadelphia, you know, with the interior guys that they have there and whatnot. So it makes total sense to me. And of course, like given the alleged rumors and offers that the Falcons allegedly sent to Danielle Hunter, you know, allegedly for the same contract or similar contract that he got signed in Houston. And again, that's not confirmed. We have heard from reliable sources that the Falcons did want Danielle Hunter, but in terms of what they offered monetarily, we don't know that. But, you know, there have been rumors out there that they offered him the same, which is around $25 million. And so, like, from my perspective, if you were willing to offer that to Danielle Hunter, who isn't really a guy that wants to rush from a 2-point stance, and is the same age as Haason Reddick, like, why wouldn't you be willing to do that for Haason Reddick, who's the same age and is actually a better fit in your defensive scheme? Now, you could certainly argue that Danielle Hunter is maybe a more proven and more reliable player based off his career trajectory, but to me, it's kind of the same thing. So, you know, maybe the issue is, and the reason why no one was willing to trade for Reddick back in March was because he wants more than 25 million. Maybe he wants 30, 35 million or something like that. And again, if that's the case, then, you know, that will probably be too big of a hill for the Falcons to climb. But, you know, once again, I would like to tell the Falcons that, you know, I was born down by the river in a little tent. So we'll see what happens, you know, with that. But, you know, I don't think it's that realistic that the Falcons are going to trade for Haason Reddick, but there may be some trades out there that are more realistic. And one of those potentially is Matt Judon, as well as some other possibilities that we'll get into to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and so much more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. It's hard to make time for things, even things that we know make us happy. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, Non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Therapy has taught me positive coping skills, like you can only control what you can control. And I use that every Sunday when I watch the Atlanta Falcons, and I'm doing my best to use that this week when it comes to the Falcons' pursuit of these big-time free agents. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, why not give BetterHelp a try? It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire. You can get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. It's that easy. I am myself a subscriber to BetterHelp, and one of the things that I really liked about BetterHelp when I signed up was that I could ask for a person of color for my therapist, because that would allow me to relate, or that person could relate to me on certain issues that maybe other people couldn't do. And so that's another reason why BetterHelp is great. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. It's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So in addition to Haason Reddick, Matt Judon is also out there looking for a new deal and wanting to get traded if New England is not willing to do it. And New England's been giving out new contracts to a whole bunch of guys, and they're not giving them out to Matt Judon. And that's not made him happy. But unlike Reddick, who is basically holding out in New York, Judon is started holding in. He did report, and he is practicing. He's been practicing for, I think, multiple weeks at this point in time. So he's still hoping something will get done. I'm not the world's biggest fan of Matt Judon. He's always been a guy that, whether it was in Baltimore or New England, gets a ton of cleanup sacks. But at the same time, like, as I say, beggars can't be choosers. He's light years better than anybody we got at this point in time. My other issue is he's a little older than Reddick. He's about 2 years older than Reddick. So theoretically has 2 less years of production potentially ahead of him. He'll turn 32, I think, tomorrow on Thursday, as many of you guys are listening to this on Wednesday. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do the trade. I've always kind of felt like he's just a tad overrated. But at the same time, like, he's been extremely productive these last 3 years in New England, even if I do think his sack numbers are a little bit inflated because he racks up a bunch of cleanup sacks. He does get reliable pressure. And even if he did kind of just regress to the mean and not racking up these 12, 15 sack seasons that he's had the last couple of years, he's still probably going to be like an 8 to 10 sack guy and probably, if healthy, get you reliably 50 plus, 60, potentially plus pressure. So, I think this trade is a lot more realistic than the Reddick trade. You only have to free up maybe like $4 or $5 million to make it happen rather than, $12 million with the Reddick trade. But I do think it's fair to question, should the Falcons be gung-ho trying to pursue a 32-year-old edge, especially coming off a year where he missed most of the year with the torn bicep? How much longevity does he have? Has he reached the point where his body's going to start breaking down and we're going to have more seasons like this, right? That's something that happened to Von Miller after his age 32 season in LA, where he hasn't been particularly healthy the last couple of years in Buffalo, right? Cam Jordan, his last year before, at least I started calling him washed on this podcast, was his age 32 season. Jerry Hughes' last year as a productive full-time starter was 2022 with the Texans at age 34. Brandon Graham was very productive in 2022 at age 34, but his last year as a full-time productive player was 2 years earlier than age 32. So that does give me a little bit of pause that, someone like Judon might just have one good year left in him. It might just be a 1 or 2 year rental. How much are you willing to give up for that? Contract-wise, draft pick-wise? Again, obviously the Falcons should be desperate, so they're probably willing to give up a lot for a 2 year rental at most. And, is that a 3rd round pick? Is that $40 million over the next 2 years? Again, that's a lot, but like, beggars can't be choosers, as I say. So is that enough to make the deal happen? Maybe. I don't know. Not to suggest that's my starting offer for Matt Judon. Like, my starting offer would probably be like a 5th and $15 million a year or something like that. And then we'll see what we can, work our way towards. But, let's talk a little bit more to wrap up about some trades that don't require such a big commitment financially or draft pick wise. Looking at some guys that are in the final years of their rookie contracts that I think there is a case. Again, not saying it's likely that any of these guys are going to get moved, but I think there's a potential timeline where, the Falcons can make a couple of phone calls and teams will be willing to hear them out, right? And there's 4 names that I have circled that fit this criteria. That's Michael Hoecht from the Rams, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka from the Bucs, Azeez Ojulari from the Giants, James Houston from the Lions. all except for Houston are set to be unrestricted free agents after this season. Houston's going to be a restricted free agent. And I think that the odds are very low at this point in time for at least the 3 unrestricted free agents that they're going to be back with their respective teams in 2025. And so, make them an offer and they'll be like, okay, we'll take that because we're probably not going to bring these guys back. We're probably not going to get a super high, comp pick, like a 3rd round pick. So, if we offer a 3rd or 4th or something like that, I think you might be able to make, that trade happen. Maybe you can get them for less than that or something like that. And the other beautiful thing is you don't have to move any money around to make these trades possible. All these guys make $3 million or less currently. So you wouldn't have to create cap space to make the trade possible. You probably would have to create cap space after you made the trade so that, you would have some cap space going into the season. But at least theoretically tomorrow, the Falcons could trade for all 4 of these guys. Obviously Hoecht is familiar with this coaching staff from his time in LA. Joe Tryon is as well. He played under Jimmy Lake at UW. It's an intra-division trade. So it's very unlikely the Bucs will trade for him, but it is something I think worth circling back. I've read some things that, the Bucs are looking for someone like their rookie Chris Braswell potentially to take over midway through the season. And does that maybe open the gates for them to trade, Joe Tryon in October or November as opposed to August, right? And I think that's probably the case with all these guys, that it's more likely, you might have to be patient and wait to see what happens by the time we get closer to the trade deadline, November 5th or whatever. I know the Giants want to keep Ojulari as a depth piece, but, maybe he gets lost in the shuffle in the first month of the season, and then you can make a trade then. To me, the one that's probably most plausible to happen today is probably James Houston with the Lions. From what I've read, they're kind of, with Aaron Glenn being the DC there, from his Saints days, it sounds like they're trying to make Houston into more of a, Sam linebacker, similar to how they sort of developed Caden Ellis from, an edge rusher to an off-ball linebacker. But Houston has been at his best purely as a sort of pass rusher, a designated pass rusher. And I could see him coming to Atlanta if he's not going to have that opportunity in Detroit and getting that opportunity in Atlanta. So he's probably the one guy that I think you could probably make the trade tomorrow and it'd be most likely, most plausible. So I'm going to continue to do more research on guys that are on the bubble that the Falcons could potentially pick up, in 2 weeks when the final cuts are made, and we'll see what develops in that. I'm also looking at guards that are on the bubble, and I'm going to be watching more film of those guys because, I don't want to live in a world where Kyle Hinton is the Falcons' 8th offensive lineman. That's just me, but we'll see on that front. So, I think the other option beyond draft capital is that the Falcons could make a player-for-player trade. We've mentioned Taylor Heineke before as someone that you could dangle on the trade market. We have such good D-tackle depth that, potentially Taquan Graham or Kentavious Street could be shopped potentially for a team that needs to beef up their interior D-line. And I think it's even worth possibly talking about potentially dangling Clark Phillips, right? And no, it's not because I hate him, but I'm just sitting here going like, if he's not going to start here, theoretically he can start somewhere else. And, given how Antonio Hamilton and Kevin King played on Friday night, I feel like our depth on the outside is pretty good. And it's possible. And again, don't hate Clark Phillips, but I just think compared to other cornerbacks, sure, you would rather keep Clark Phillips over some of these other veteran options, but because Clark Phillips is so young and cheap that he would garner more in return via trade. So it would be worth exploring in that regard. So, if I can flip Clark Phillips and add 8 sacks to this defense, I'm going to do that, but I'm sure many of you guys would be reluctant to do that. But let me know what are your thoughts on that. So, I want to point out, I think there's a good probability that Clark Phillips will be starting games at some point this year. I don't know when that is going to be, either as an outside corner or as a nickel. So, I would prefer to keep him as that sort of insurance policy. But, if Detroit was like, hey, we'll give you James Houston for Clark Phillips, I'm like, I'm not. That's not going to stop me. So, I think you can also throw Troy Anderson and Nate Landman in that conversation. Now, again, my personal preference would be I would be more willing to trade Nate Landman than I would be Troy Anderson, but I could imagine for similar reasons, because of Troy Anderson's youth and potential and upside, you could probably get more from him via trade. And I say that like Nate Landman's like 30 years old. He's also young, but you know that whole conversation. So those are just some things worth considering. We'll see if the Falcons consider it. We'll see if the Falcons can make a move for Justin Simmons. We'll probably have more topics of conversation. We'll probably be chatting it up with Jarvis later this week as well. So make sure you tune into that. We got a Falcons historian player shootout soon, the finale with Matt Ryan, Corey Woodruff, Will McFadden. Don't know what day that's going to be, given all the drama surrounding the Falcons making roster moves. So we'll see when that airs, but that is coming up in the next couple of days or so. So make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen so that you don't miss any of the great content coming your way. And also check out Locked On Fantasy Football, Locked On Sports Atlanta. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.